So this is Eric Nanson, one of the artists for North State Woodworkers, and we're at the Shasta County Arts Council. In our gallery, the show is in the process of going up, and you were speaking before about your first show being at Shasta College, so do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it was just at Shasta College back in the day. They used to have in the library foyer like a hallway, and they exhibited artwork there. And I hadn't at that point. I was going to Shasta College, but I didn't take any art classes. I did take an art history class there, and that was the first art class I took. And so I asked the art teachers who didn't know me, and they're like, you don't have any classes here. But Michael Blivens, Mike was very instrumental in helping me get a show in there. And it was just a phenomenal show because it was my from the ceiling, off the floor, and from the ceiling, out of the floor, and off the wall collection. And it was primarily wood turned pieces because my dad was a wood turner.
Okay.
And that's where I learned. He taught me how to, do woodworking, and specifically wood turning, and I kind of taught myself sculpting and stuff. But the show was just wonderful. It was in the hallway, and the librarians loved the stuff, but so many people were laughing and talking and interacting about stuff that they'd come out and I would say, shh, can you tell everybody to be quiet? We love the stuff. And so it was a great introduction. And like I said, it was kind of like a fly on the wall because like I said, I was a jock in high school and I just started making art the Christmas break of my senior year in high school at Shasta High School. I'd done woodworking with my dad for years, and I'm just going over some of the questions that you'd had they emailed me. And for my first kind of inspiration into art was actually through Fine Woodworking magazine, and specifically they had an annual yearbook they would do that cobbled together the best of the best. And when I would get those, I would just pour through them because it was not just woodworking, it was woodworkers who took it to an art form. Right. And a lot of sculptures and whimsical art furniture. And so that was my inspiration. And so then I started I've done woodworking, and we built my parents' house. We did all the cabinetry and stuff. But I just started making art just all of a sudden. And I've been making it for almost 40 years since. So, it's like...
Well, tell us about this piece.
This one is, I call it Swerve. My father and I, when I was in 5th grade in 1978, way back, went and cut a tree down in Anderson, a Claro walnut. So it's like a black walnut, but a local variety. And I can spin that for it if you want. You can kind of see the different angles. And luckily, and I don't know why, we cut things in big slabs, quite large slabs. And you have to let it cure like an inch a year. So we really didn't touch it for years. And then we still didn't. It was kind of like the gold reserve. You never touch it. And when I would try to pull a piece to turn something, my dad was all like, oh, I don't know. And so it was just kind of became this stuff you don't use. And, forward many years later, it still was in my parents' shed, and my dad had passed. And so I just went and got some, and I started making sculptures. Because I've always done what I call additive sculptures. So you turn pieces and you glue and put things together, but subtractive, having a block of something and taking away was always a little scary to me, and it just was intimidating. So a few years ago, when I got this wood, I just thought, okay, I'm going to start tackling my art demons. And so I did it, and the first piece I did was the scroll, I think, which one, unless you want to go over here. And so this was the first piece that I did, and I just kind of started making it. And actually that piece is the first, but I started the vine and leaf initially, and I had it roughed out, but I didn't have it in its final stages. So this one I actually had in a dream. I remember having a dream, and I saw this piece in it, and I woke up, and I thought, oh man, I wish I would have thought of that. Like, and then I was like, wait a minute, that was my dream. Like, I did think of that. And so, like, I sketched it out, which I'm not the best sketcher, but I sketched it out in my sketchbook, and it sat for a long time. And then so I started, that was the very first subtractive piece, if you will, but I set it aside and came back to it. So this was the first piece I finished from start to finish, which is Scroll, which has, I don't know if you can see the beautiful striping in that.
Yeah, it is. It's quite lovely.
See. And then I also do welding, so I needed, it doesn't stand by itself, so I welded a base, and it worked out really well. And so it was, more of a basic shape, but again, it has, an aesthetic quality to it. Like I was telling you guys earlier, is some of the more minimalistic, simplistic shapes are more beautiful than the more elaborate, detailed, and they both have their pros and cons, but I'm almost drawn more to some of the more minimalistic because they are more sensual, or like, if you want to look at that piece over here. So, and over here, and I think this is the second piece I finished from start to finish, and it's called Lotus Leaf. And to me, it looks like a lotus flower with the leaf and stuff. And you can see from this side, it looks very different. And that's almost like a Brancusi-esque type sculpture, real minimal. But I just love the lines and all the different angles and stuff. And so that.
When did you start incorporating other mediums into your work? Because you also work in glass, metal.
Yeah, I work in pretty much every medium, and I just, after my From the Ceiling Aisle Floor and Off the Wall collection, which was primarily the Claro walnut and oak, because my dad had purchased a bunch of oak for building our cabinets and stuff. So I went with materials I had at hand, and like I said, my dad went to a workshop. He worked for Pac Bell as an engineer, and it was I don't even know what it was about, but they talked about a concept called scotomas. And I don't think, if you try to look it up in the dictionary, it's even, I don't know where they got the word, but scotoma is something you see so often that you no longer see it. And I like that concept, like a manhole cover. Like, how many times do you walk by, drive over a manhole cover, and how often do you actually see it? So I got the concept that to juxtapose something that is so basic and banal and common that you don't see it, and to then do something with it that all of a sudden now it comes to life. So for the manhole cover, I did a submarine periscope coming in, slid off the lid. So it's called sewer sub. And so taking that, and then I made a dart, a throwing dart with a point on it, but I made it huge, and it comes off the wall. And I also made a suction lick called Lick and Stick, which was a big, like those kids ones where you lick them, and it's 3.5 feet, And I had one that called the Big Drip, which was a all wood shower head and knobs that looked completely realistic and to scale. And then I turned a humongous drip coming off it, because I always kind of thought that if a tree falls in the woods and you're not there, it doesn't make a noise. Well, I thought when you're not in the shower, because when you're sleeping it's dripping, it sounds like huge drips. So maybe they're these monster drips that we don't know because they drip. So it's, big, huge drip. And so again, the concept of scotomas, of something you see so often that you no longer see it, but now you throw it in a juxtaposition of some other size variation or something else, and then all of a sudden you notice it. So, but then after that, again with the fine woodworking, I was drawn to furniture, and the way my brain seemed to work, well, that From the Signal out of Four and Off the Wall collection was really highly influenced by Gary Larson, the Far Side cartoons.
Yes.
Which I saw you guys have a calendar in there. And Klaus Oldenburg, who was an artist who does realistic, huge size pieces and soft sculptures, but they're of everyday common things. So that was what that was. But then I started segueing, and my brain just works in making art furniture. So it's on the border that you start getting in controversy. There's a high-end craft versus art argument that's been going on for a bazillion years, where is high-end contemporary craft art, or is it just craft? And and what makes the difference? So I've always been on that, fine line of both, and so I went into art furniture. With art furniture, I started, just incorporating in metal and stuff, and then I've come to find early that nothing is that hard to do, and people, when they try to tell you it's hard and you can't do it, they just don't want you to try because they don't want the competition. And if you want to do something, just learn by doing it. I did take classes at Chico State. I took a sculpture class and a hand-built ceramic class that I learned stuff in how to do slip cast. So I did a whole series of teapots. I would turn them originally out of wood because that was the medium on the lathe, and then I would put them in shapes and then pour plaster molds around them and do slip cast, which is a liquid clay you pour in and pour out and fire. And so I don't like to be pigeonholed into one thing. It gets boring. And, I just finished a children's book last night and just uploaded it. So I do poetry. I got over 700 poems. So I'm kind of like a Renaissance man. I glass blowing, glass fusing, woodworking, welding and metal arts, plastics and resins. I dabble in painting. It's not like, and I do poetry and
photography too.
Photography is one of my newer passions, which in the last 10 years, not that new, but and so I just work in everything. I just love the immersion of it. And lately, I've got into the AI thing within the last week or two, and this mid-journey is just mind-blowing. And people are going to see they don't even know what it's influenced now, because the images you're seeing on the internet, they don't realize that they're made by computer, artificial intelligence, and they are. A lot of architecture and design, and I graduated in design from Chico State, and so I also see myself as a designer, and I did for years do product design of my own. I would get the concept, I would actually make the prototypes, and I would either make them myself or use foundries to cast them, and then I would polish and finish and drill and package. And I did the International Contemporary Furniture Fair in New York at the Javits, and San Francisco National Gift Fair for years, and set up booths and did all that, because product design is just sculpture on a small basis that is mass produced, for the market, but you're still doing the same thing. You're making sculptural shapes. And so I started doing more metal work in that, because I did pens and razors and hangers and furniture and lighting, and and just everything is artistic and everything else. And so I think that's what Susan's questions was, do I have formal training or do I teach myself? So my father taught me woodworking and the basics, and then I went to Chico State. I went to Shasta College first, but I didn't take art classes except for an art history. And then I went to Chico State, and I was pre-law, and then I switched to design, but I did take a sculpture class, like I said, and a ceramics class. And then I was toying with the idea of making my own master's at Chico State, but I wasn't doing it to get a master's. I was doing it to get the knowledge. I wanted kind of like interior architectural art. I was going to create my own. And then I came back for summer break to Reading, to my parents, and I made a bunch of art. But my brother was then going to be going to Shasta College, and I looked at the catalog, and they had all these sculpture classes. And glass blowing and all this stuff I want to do. And I thought, you know what? I don't need to do, Chico at 10 times the price. So I went back to Shasta College, and Cliff Souter, who was the sculpture and glass blowing teacher out there, and Mike Blivens, who was an amazing person, still is, and he a great influence around here and a very good friend. And so I took sculpture classes and ceramics and just more and just everything I could. And so it was, great. And then I've just been making art ever since. So.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, do you have any other pieces here that we haven't looked at yet?
We do. We
I think
have.
we have one more, right?
Yeah, we have Twisted Heart here. I called it that just because it looks kind of like a heart shape that's twisted. So this was my kind of first departure into more intricate, curved, and more sculpture-y, and going very thin on these. Some of my other ones are a little thicker, and this one I were crazy thin, and I just kind of went with my intuition, and I didn't use calipers to, you can break through at any time, and I just went with it, and I surprised myself in that I just trusted myself, and it works, and that's how I do sculptures. I have a concept for them initially, and then I try to follow that as best I can, but at some point you have to stop what your vision was, and you have to go with the piece that it's telling you what to do. So you have to look at it aesthetically and where the lines and the curves are, and switch up from what you had as a concept to what it wants to be. And stuff like that, so.
Yeah, your wood sculptures have a lot of grace and movement in them, and they're lovely. I mean, you look at them, and what you've done with the wood is just, you've made it flow, you've brought it to life.
Well, and when you see the hunks that they just look so rough, and you wouldn't think, you can get this out of it. And it kills me to waste so much wood because, there's a block, and I utilize every millimeter I can of wood. But you take a lot out, and the sawdust that is created, you wouldn't believe. Like from a piece like this is like a whole garbage bag full of sawdust. It's pretty crazy. And but there are natural imperfections in the wood. There's checks and cracks and stuff. So Bernie, his friend and fellow woodworker, has taught me with epoxy and this certain stuff to fill them, and so they blend in, especially with the black walnut, you really don't see. But there are some voids and stuff, but you can pretty much get away with hiding them. But
how did the car fire affect your work?
It affected it in that two of my biggest patron of the arts, which are the Petruses, Gus and Jody Petrus, who have commissioned pieces and purchased pieces that I've made, and Rayola Pratt and Tori and Trudy Pratt, they lost their homes. In fact, the Petruses, I had just made a 7-foot Ganesha, which is a Hindu deity that's half elephant with 4 arms and half human kind of, and was 7 feet tall. And I also do upcycled, repurposed sculptures, and I had a booth at a local antique mall vendor place for years, and I made lighting and furniture and accessories for that. And so that piece was in, so I already was in that realm of, and so when the car fire happened, clients who lost their homes and stuff, a lot of times I got them saying, can you make me a piece of art from the ashes?
Yeah.
Essentially. And so I did get commissions for doing pieces, and the Art from the Ashes project, which we both did. And actually, Jody and Gus have the cobbled together wall piece that everybody who did Art from the Ashes did a tile, or basically 12 by 12. I cut metal corrugated that was rusted that we got from a site. And all the artists did one or more, and they were all into a wall piece, and the Peters have that in their home. And so it has all of our pieces in one big, large piece.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
It was, and actually the corrugated metal was from Whiskey Town, from the artist's cabins.
Yeah.
It was the roof.
Yeah. There was he was an artist out there, out by Oak Bottom on the other side of the road, and he was an inventor of gold mining equipment. And we went out there, and they were these massive 15-foot high sculptures to me, and they'd all gotten burned, and so I was able to get pieces from there and incorporate and add to my what I call boneyard. I've got a huge boneyard of old rusted metal for making sculptures and whatever, so I use for that. But yeah, so I had my mom's house was spared, but our land, which we had 15 acres, is mostly burned. But it made it through. But yeah, and it was interesting, seeing. I had just made that 7-foot Ganesha and installed it 2 weeks before the car fire at the Petrus's house, at the one that burned. And Ganesha is a deity of rebirth, and it survived.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was about 10 or 15 feet off of the house, and it didn't. All it did, one little thing melted a little, but it was all steel. So it made it through fabulously, and they had me reinstall it at their new house, like a year later after. And and it looks as great as it did. So luckily, and then, I had to pull stuff from both their house, everything that burnt, they had me put everything in the garage, didn't get burnt. And then Rayola Pratt, I picked her property, I call it picking, because I'd go, and because when I had my booth at the antique mall, you have to have rusty stuff to make stuff.
Right.
And so Rayola had graciously allowed me to go around and cobble stuff from her place, and then it burned right after also. So, and then I helped Tori, her daughter, make a gate at Tori's house from stuff, and Tori's made a lot of artwork from it, and some of it was from the bench show that we had at Turtle Bay and at the Museum of Monca of Northern Cali Art in Chico, the big that Alice Perimsky coordinated, and so she had several benches that were amazing and made out of that, and I helped her weld them and stuff, and so yeah, it and I wrote poems about it, about people's ashes. I had a poem that's where, as the ashes came down, I had it as it would fall and touch people, they would feel the toy, the joy a child got from a toy at Christmas time, and as the ashes came down, as they touched people, they felt the emotions and the memories that came with the stuff that had burned, and that's kind of a poem but I wrote several poems about it, and so that's how it affected that. So.
We still have a lot of metal pieces left if you want some.
I've got an extensive boneyard, so I'm probably good, but thank you. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about your work, or?
Come down and see it. That's definitely, I started out doing across the street. They have the New Works Gallery, which is a cooperative gallery many, many years ago. And we had a pretty thriving art community then. It was, in the 80s, we thought it was bad. That was the high times. And so we have a lot of art in Reading, here at the Shasta County Arts Council and the Old City Hall Gallery, North Valley Art League, at the Carter House Gallery, at the New City Hall, and we have openings, and we need people to come, and experience the art and see the art. People are moved by it and to make it, and so, come see the art, buy the art, and.
Well, and you'll be here too for the cultural cruise.
Yeah, I'll be here for the cultural cruise, yes, definitely.
Which is always a highlight of the year.
Yeah. So come on down.